Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today. As faculty participating in TEAL, that's Technology Enhanced Active Learning, you already know exactly how crucial it is to create engaging experiences for your students. But today, we're going to take some of those bigger, maybe even complex instructional design concepts and transform them into highly practical, ready-to-use insights. Right off the bat, I want to briefly acknowledge that you had 3 different ways to learn this content: read and annotate, listen and discuss, or watch and interact. And you selected the watch and interact pathway. I absolutely love that choice. Because of that, I really want to encourage you to actively participate as we go along today. I'm going to ask you to pause occasionally to just kind of chew on some of the questions we bring up, because you'll actually be applying these very ideas as soon as you finish watching. To get our brains warmed up, let's kick things off with a quick reflection. Which active learning strategy do you currently use most often, and why? Go ahead and actually hit pause for just a moment. Really reflect on your own teaching habits. Were you intentionally trying to promote a particular type of thinking, or, were you maybe simply looking for a more engaging classroom activity? Keep that honest answer in the back of your mind as we move forward. Okay, let's dive right into this and reframe how we approach active learning. Here's our roadmap. We'll start by opening up the active learning toolbox, then look at designing for student thinking, match goals to thinking, compare physical versus digital tools, observe 5 strategies in action, and finally, wrap up with choosing your next strategy. All right, part 1, the active learning toolbox. So if you attend almost any teaching workshop these days, you're inevitably bombarded with just an endless list of educational buzzwords, right? Think, Pair, Share, Kahoot, Padlet, AI integrations. Finding new strategies is the easy part. The real challenge is deciding which one to actually use. It's kind of like opening a massive toolbox. Inside, you've got hammers, screwdrivers, wrenches, tape measures, but owning every tool in the hardware store doesn't automatically make someone a skilled builder. Expertise comes from knowing exactly which tool fits the specific job. I mean, you literally wouldn't use a tape measure to drive a nail. And that brings us to a crucial paradigm shift. We need to move away from what we'd call an activity-first mindset. One of the most common traps in active learning is starting the design process by picking an activity. We say things like, hey, I think I'll use a Kahoot today, or let's do a Padlet. Instead, we need to shift towards a thinking-first mindset. The very first question shouldn't be about the tool at all. It should be, what kind of thinking do I want my students to do today? Moving right along to part 2, designing for student thinking. The educational psychologist Herbert Simon really hit the nail on the head when he said, learning results from what the learner does and thinks, not from what the teacher does. That is such a powerful idea. Students learn because of the mental work that they themselves perform, not simply because we presented the information beautifully on a silver platter. And this completely anchors our shift to that thinking-first mentality. The activity or the strategy is never the final goal. The thinking is the goal. Let's actually reconnect this back to Module 1 for a second. Think about what we covered there: retrieval practice, spaced practice, interleaving, universal design for learning. Now, on the surface, each of these approaches looks totally different, but they share the exact same underlying principle. They are all intentionally designed to encourage a very specific kind of cognitive work. Retrieval practice strengthens memory through recall. Interleaving forces students to compare ideas. They aren't just random activities, they're highly targeted mental workouts. So here is your second chance to interact. I'm going to invite you to pause again for just a moment. Take a look at your most recent lesson plan and honestly evaluate your design process. Are you selecting the activities first, or are you selecting the thinking first? Take a few seconds to really think about it. All right, part 3, matching goals to thinking. The truth is, there is no single best active learning strategy out there, simply because different learning goals require entirely different forms of cognitive engagement. For example, if your learning goal is just for students to remember basic terminology, well, the thinking task there is retrieval. You're going to use a totally different strategy for that than you would if your goal was having them solve a complex workplace problem, which requires application and decision-making. You wouldn't teach a lesson on basic vocabulary the exact same way you teach a multifaceted case study, right? Part 4, physical versus digital tools. Let's demystify the whole technology aspect by breaking our options down into 2 separate toolboxes. Over here, the physical toolbox has your classic discussions, concept maps, case studies, and debates. And then over there, the digital toolbox holds your Canvas discussions, polling systems, Padlets, and AI partners. But I want to be incredibly clear about this. Neither toolbox is inherently better than the other. Technology doesn't somehow create active learning on its own, any more than a hammer builds a house by itself. A collaborative document might be a great way to encourage explanation, while a digital polling tool might be excellent for prediction. The technology changes, sure, but the core instructional design principle does not. The tech merely supports the thinking you want to happen. Let's jump into part 5, 5 strategies in action. Let's see how this thinking first mindset applies practically. First up is an absolute classic. Think, pair, share. Students think independently about a question, discuss it with a partner, and then share it with the class. Why does this work so well? Because it literally forces students to slow down. The primary thinking here is explanation, comparison, reasoning, and communication. It gives everyone a safe space to organize their logic before they have to speak publicly. So you choose this tool when you specifically need students to refine their reasoning. Next up, we have prediction activities. This is where you ask students to predict an outcome before you even teach the concept. The primary thinking here is hypothesis formation and activating prior knowledge. And this is just brilliant because it creates instant investment. When a student makes a prediction, they suddenly have skin in the game. They care a whole lot more about discovering whether their thinking was accurate. It makes the new learning deeply, deeply meaningful. Time for another quick pause. Looking at just those first 2 strategies, I want you to think about your own discipline. What kind of thinking do your students do most often in your classroom? Is it recall? Is it hypothesis formation? Hit pause and really consider the cognitive habits you are currently fostering day to day. All right, strategy number 3 is retrieval practice. This involves things like short quizzes, flashcards, or quick polls to recall ideas for memory. The vital thing to note here is that the goal is absolutely not grading. The goal is strengthening memory. If your learning goal is for students to have fundamental facts right at their fingertips, this is the tool you pull from the box because it directly aligns with the cognitive task of recall and metacognition. Strategy 4 is collaborative concept mapping, where students organize ideas visually. This one brilliantly illustrates how we can shift the mental work away from isolated memorization and firmly into systems thinking. If you need students to understand how a bunch of complex ideas connect to one another, or to compare different overarching theories, a concept map forces that exact type of organizational thinking. Finally, strategy 5, case or scenario analysis. Here, students examine realistic, often messy situations to defend a solution using solid evidence. This strategy demands high-level application, analysis, and decision-making. You use this when you don't just want students to remember facts, but when you really need them to apply those facts to authentic, real-world workplace problems. And finally, part 6, choosing your next strategy. We've explored the toolbox and looked at some very practical examples. If you take away just one central message from our time together today, please let it be this. Begin with the thinking you want students to do. Active learning isn't about collecting a massive list of instructional tools or discovering the absolute newest, flashiest educational technology. It is entirely about intentionally selecting experiences that mandate the specific cognitive work your students need to accomplish. Start with your goal, identify the thinking required, and then pick your tool. To wrap up this watch and interact pathway, I want to leave you with one final provocative question to ponder. Which of the 5 strategies we just covered might fit perfectly into one of your upcoming lessons? And how might adopting this thinking first mindset prepare you for our very next lesson, where we're going to take a deep dive into advanced approaches like collaborative learning, scenario-based learning, and problem-based learning? Think about it, apply it in your classroom, and I'll see you in the next module. Thanks so much for watching.